When most people think of Dooku as a Jedi Master, they think of Qui-Gon Jinn. They picture the legendary pairing of a refined aristocratic Jedi and a stubborn idealist who challenge the Council at every turn. That version of Dooku feels dignified, measured, firmly inside the light, even as he was already drifting away from the Council's politics. But Qui-Gon was not Dooku's last Padawan and student. After Qui-Gon, there was another Padawan, one that the Jedi Order would like you to forget. One whose story exposes the truth about what Dooku was becoming. Her name was Komari Vosa. By the time Dooku chose Vosa, he was not the same man who had raised Qui-Gon Jinn. His patience with the Order had thinned. His faith in the High Council's wisdom had eroded. He was still wearing the robes of a Jedi Master, but his beliefs were splintering beneath the surface. Dooku had always been a master of concealment. He learned early how to bury his doubts, his pride, and his contempt under a flawless exterior, elegant manners, impeccable form, absolute control over his voice and expression. Dooku wrapped his inner turmoil in dignity and called it composure. It is part of why he never manifested the burning yellow eyes that reveal so many Sith. Dooku does not let his darkness spill outward. He forces it inward. He intellectualizes it. He convinces himself that his coldness is clarity, that his disdain is honesty. But darkness has to go somewhere. If it does not consume you, it bleeds into the others that you shape. Komari Vosa is the first clear reflection of the man that Dooku was becoming. When he took her as a Padawan, he did not do so as the idealistic Jedi Master who once believed the Council could still do right. He chose her as a man already leaning towards the Sith in spirit, if not in name. A man whose respect for power and control was beginning to outweigh his loyalty to the Jedi. Vosa entered the equation as a gifted, volatile, combat-oriented student. Aggressive, competitive, fiercely driven. Komari Vosa thrived in sparring rings, struggling with detachment, and cared far more about proving herself than about her own inner peace. The Council saw this and quietly worried. They sensed the aggression, the passion, her dangerous edge. Dooku saw many of the same things, but he did not fear them. He admired them. Dooku chose her because she was fierce, because she moved through combat with the kind of conviction he believed that the Jedi were losing, because her raw, violent potential matched the harsher, more unforgiving vision of the Jedi that he was beginning to form in his mind. For Komari Vosa, being chosen by Dooku meant everything. This was not a respected Jedi Knight. This was Jedi Master Dooku, a living legend with a reputation as one of the greatest duelists and warriors of his age, a man whose opinions carried weight even when he opposed the Jedi High Council. Komari Vosa did not just respect him, she attached herself to him, and she grew to love him. Admiration became fixation, fixation became devotion. She watched him constantly, the way he moved, the precision of every correction, the quiet criticisms that he had for the Council's decisions. To a young Padawan searching for something to believe in, Dooku's certainty was intoxicating. Slowly, she began to build her entire sense of self around him. Every success in training felt like proof that she was worthy of his attention. Every failure felt like a personal rejection. His rare words of praise mattered more than the Council's approval, more than the Jedi Code, more than anything. This is how attachment really looks inside the Jedi Order. Not dramatic declarations, but 1,000 small dependencies no one wants to name. Dooku noticed this imbalance. He was too perceptive to not notice it. He saw how hard Komari Vosa pushed herself just to hear a quiet, well done. He felt the weight of her eyes on him. He knew how much she cared, and in the wrong way. But instead of guiding her through it, he did what he always did with uncomfortable truths. He hid them behind what he called discipline. But this is a lie. He became distant, formal, controlled. He made himself an unreachable ideal rather than a present Jedi Master. He told himself that by refusing to acknowledge the attachment, he was keeping it contained. But he wasn't. Komari Vosa only worked harder to reach him. She embraced his philosophy of refined combat, took his obsession with form, and turned it into her own. She shaped her identity around becoming the kind of warrior that he would respect. And eventually, she would even forge her own curved hilt lightsaber in his image, weapons that would later be passed into the hands of Asajj Ventress. To the Jedi, Komari Vosa was a talented but a troubled Padawan. To Dooku, she was promising, flawed, and ultimately convenient to blame. But to Komari, Dooku was the center of her universe, and in that uneven bond, a master who had already drifted into darkness, and a student who built her entire world around him. The stage was set for one of the most brutal and tragic falls in the Jedi Order's history. The Council would later claim that Vosa lost her own way, but the truth is simpler and more damning. Komari Vosa did not just fall on her own. She was pulled down by the gravity of a Jedi Master who was already halfway gone. Komari Vosa entered the Order already marked by intensity. Even as a youngling, she trained with a ferocity that the Council found unsettling. She pressed harder, struck faster, and treated sparring not as meditation, but as a challenge that she needed to conquer. Her instructors noted the warning signs early: passion, aggression, competitiveness, a desire to prove herself rather than learn. But to Master Dooku, this was not a flaw. It was precisely what drew him to her. By the time he considered taking another Padawan after Qui-Gon, Dooku's faith in the Order had eroded. He had found the Council hesitant, indecisive, and afraid of confronting the growing dangers in the wide galaxy. He saw complacency in their diplomacy and weakness in their restraint. But in Komari Vosa, he saw the opposite. She moved with purpose. She struck with conviction. She burned with the kind of fire that Dooku believed the Jedi had long since forgotten. She reminded him of the warrior that he believed the Jedi should be, not the bureaucrats that the Council was becoming. And that is why he selected her. Not because she was balanced, but because she wasn't. Komari Vosa represented his own unspoken frustrations, the edge he kept hidden, the aggression he suppressed beneath elegance and an aristocratic calm. Where he buried his darkness, Komari showed hers openly, and that honesty was something that he both admired and was drawn to. And once he selected her, he began shaping her, subtly, quietly, almost unconsciously. He guided her towards precision over peace, towards technique over meditation, towards discipline as power, not as clarity, toward the belief that weakness was the flaw that would destroy her. Dooku trained her as if preparing a Jedi for a galaxy he already believed was dying. And Vosa absorbed every lesson. His strict demands, his coldness, his quiet criticisms of the High Council, his relentless obsession with the lightsaber. She interpreted every lesson as a message, every correction as a test, every small praise as validation of her worth. And as her devotion grew, Dooku did what he always did with uncomfortable truths. He pushed them deeper into the shadows. He withdrew emotionally, choosing distance over connection. He offered discipline instead of guidance. He gave her mastery, but not stability, direction, but not understanding. And Vosa, desperate to be worthy of his respect, shaped herself into a student that she believed he wanted. She modeled her lightsaber technique after his. She mimicked his poise. She adopted his criticisms of the Jedi. She forged curved hilt lightsabers like his, a physical reflection of her admiration, a symbol of how far his influence had burrowed into her identity. Dooku never asked her to shape herself after him, but he didn't stop her either. He let her devotion grow because it served his ideals, because she became exactly the kind of Jedi he believed the Order needed, and exactly the kind of Jedi that the Order feared. Komari Vosa was pushed not through explicit instruction, but through the pressure of Dooku's expectations, the coldness of his distance, and the silent approval of her intensity. He did not corrupt her intentionally. He corrupted her by omission, by silence, by allowing his own unresolved darkness to spill into the shape of her training. Komari Vosa would try to prove him right, prove that she was the warrior that he believed in. On a battlefield that would burn her life to the ground, she would try to prove it for a final time. Galidraan. Galidraan was supposed to be a clean operation. The Jedi had been fed false intelligence. The Council believed the Mandalorians occupying the planet were extremists threatening civilians. So a task force was assembled, confident, righteous, and unprepared for the truth. But for Komari Vosa, Galidraan was something different. It was her moment. For years she had trained under Dooku's strict discipline, shaping herself into the warrior she believed he wanted her to be. But meditation and diplomacy had never been her language. Combat was. And the Mandalorians, the greatest warriors alive, they would finally give her the chance to speak it. To Vosa, this was a battlefield worthy of her. This was where a true warrior proved their strength. This is where she finally believed she could show Dooku that she was not merely gifted, she was exceptional. She entered the battle with anticipation, a thrill building in her chest. The Mandalorians were legendary. She had heard of their stories, their skill, their armor, their discipline, their refusal to break, their ability to kill Force sensitives. Facing them wasn't fear, it was a privilege, a duel of destinies. When the fighting erupted, the Jedi realized immediately that the Mandalorians were not a disorganized extremist group. Their formation was tight, their aim was flawless, their advance was relentless. The Jedi line faltered, but Komari Vosa did not. She ignited her lightsaber and plunged into the front line like a force of nature. Her movements were lightning, faster, sharper, more ferocious than anyone expected, even her fellow Jedi. She met the Mandalorians head-on, not with caution, but with hunger. Every stroke carried the weight of years of suppressed intensity. Every leap was fueled by the need to be seen. Every kill was a message to Dooku. Galidraan became Komari Vosa's love letter to her master, written in the blood of the Mandalorians. 5 fell, then 10, then 15. But something else happened as the battle intensified and the snow fell. She felt something she had never experienced before. A surge of power that flooded her muscles and sharpened her mind. A sense of superiority washed over her as she cut down some of the greatest warriors in the galaxy. She felt unstoppable, chosen, elevated above Jedi, above fear, above limitation, in a dark, twisted way. Galidraan was the greatest moment of her life. She was finally the warrior she always believed she could be. She was proving herself in a way the Jedi could not deny. And above all, she was proving herself to him, to Dooku. By the time the fighting ended, Komari Vosa had personally slain 20 Mandalorians, a feat nearly unmatched in Jedi history. She stood, catching her breath, her robe scorched, blade still lit, confident that when her master saw her standing amid the carnage, he would finally acknowledge her worth. But when she turned to him, expecting pride, Dooku's face was not admiration, it was fear. Fear of what she had become, fear of what he had molded, fear of seeing his own buried darkness manifested in her unrestrained brutality. Vosa believed she had created a masterpiece, her greatest triumph. Dooku saw only a master that he had shaped. The Jedi Council was even harsher. They didn't see brilliance, they saw savagery. They saw passion unchecked, violence embraced, and a Padawan who fought not to protect, but to dominate. Their judgment was swift and devastating. Vosa was barred from the Jedi trials. Her training was over, her future erased. She would remain a Padawan indefinitely, a fate that she believed was worse than exile. And Dooku did nothing. He did not defend her. He did not try to save her future. He simply allowed the Council to strip away everything that she had. For Komari Vosa, whose entire identity rested on proving herself to her master, this was ruin. Galidraan was supposed to make her worthy, but instead it destroyed her place in the Order and shattered her very foundation of life. And the Jedi, blind to how deeply she was breaking, sent her directly into another crisis, one that would finish the job. Baltizaar. Baltizaar was supposed to be cleansing work, a Jedi strike team, a destabilizing Outer Rim world, and a dangerous cult that had begun to carve symbols of terror through the local population. A dark side worshipping cult called the Bando Gora. They were whispered about in even criminal circles. A death-worshipping sect of force-twisted assassins whose victims rarely died cleanly, and never with their minds intact. The Order believed a decisive Jedi intervention would sever the cult's growing influence, but what they walked into was something far worse. From the moment the gunships descended, the air was wrong. The atmosphere was heavy, thick, polluted with the residue of narcotics and chemical toxins the cult burned in massive bonfires. Strange sigils carved into the mud seemed to pulse under the flickering light, and the shadows moved in ways that defied logic, as if something unseen lingered just beyond the corner of one's vision. Komari Vosa stepped out of the gunship with her lightsaber already activated in hand, not out of fear, instinct. Something was off, something alive in the air. The first attack came like a scream. Bando Gora zealots burst from the shattered ruins around the landing site, their motions erratic and violent, their bodies shaking with drug-induced frenzy. Their eyes were wide, pupils blown to black, veins glowing faintly with injected compounds. They charged the Jedi without hesitation, without strategy, and without fear. And yet, they did not move like untrained fanatics. Their coordination was unnatural, their timing disturbingly synchronized, as if dozens of broken minds were being pushed by one collective will. A will that Vosa felt almost immediately, like cold fingers scraping against the back of her skull. The Jedi attempted to form a defensive circle, but the Bando Gora did not attack in predictable ways. They moved like animals, crawling, sprinting, hurling themselves boldly at Jedi blades. Even as they were burned or struck, the zealots did not scream. They laughed, gurgling nonsense chants through foaming mouths. The Jedi line collapsed in minutes. Padawans were pulled screaming into the dark. Jedi Knights vanished under crowds of clawing hands. Even Masters struggled against the overwhelming drug-fueled onslaught. But the true horror was not in their ferocity, it was in their resilience. Zealots with lightsaber wounds through their chest kept fighting. Limbs broken at impossible angles still clawed forward. Bodies pierced with lightsabers collapsed only after several seconds. Seconds in which they continued to thrash, tear, and bite with rabid determination. Komari Vosa cut through 3 at once, spinning into a defensive stance, expecting the others to hesitate, fear her, to reform. But they did not. They surged towards her like insects drawn to flame. As she stared, the Force trembled within her. She could feel a shadow, a presence that she could not name. The Jedi's formation dissolved entirely. Vosa watched as a knight that she had trained beside was dragged into a pit of hands. She saw a master overwhelmed beneath a tide of bodies, his lightsaber skittering across the ground. She felt Padawans fall in the Force like candles snuffed out in a storm. She fought harder, faster, more desperately than ever before. But there was no winning this. No formation, no logic, no strategy. There was only survival, and even that was beginning to slip away. A wave of cultists tackled her, ripping at her armor, clawing, pulling, screaming. One slammed a drug-coated hook into her shoulder. Another forced a rag soaked in neurotoxin against her mouth. Komari Vosa fought with everything she had. But that was still not enough. Her lightsaber fell from her hand, her vision blurred, her breath staggered. The world tilted sideways, and the last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her was a ring of cultists kneeling around her fallen body, as if she were an offering, a prize, a vessel. Baltizaar was not a battle. It was the doorway to a transformation, because the Bando Gora had not dragged her down into their lair to kill her. They had taken Komari Vosa because they sensed something inside of her. Rage, pain, power, ferocity. And they intended to break it open and see. The Jedi strike team died on Baltizaar, but Komari Vosa did not. What waited for her below the surface would shatter the last remnants of the Padawan that she once was, and give birth to something much darker. Komari Vosa did not wake in a cell. She woke in a ritual chamber. The Bando Gora did not treat prisoners like captives. They treated them as raw material. Stone walls oozed with spilled narcotics. Strange hieroglyphs were carved everywhere. Spirals, jagged symbols, eyes. The air was thick with incense and chemicals, making it hard to breathe without slipping into hallucination. And around her, robed zealots. They all whispered a language that she did not understand. The Jedi code would be no shield here. The moment that Vosa stirred, hands gripped her face, forcing her eyes open. A needle plunged into her arm, another pressed against her neck. A third injected something directly beneath her tongue. Her veins burned, her breath seized, her mind splintered. But this was only the beginning. The Bando Gora did not break bodies, they broke minds. They deprived her of light for days at a time, leaving her in complete blackness where only the sound of their distant unbroken chants could be heard. They deprived her of sleep, dragging her awake whenever exhaustion overtook her, shocking her nerves or forcing her upright with hooked restraints. They filled her lungs with hallucinogenic smoke. They starved her until her body trembled. They whispered lies and visions through the Force, images of Jedi abandoning her, Dooku turning his back, the Council watching her burn. She tried to meditate. She tried to focus. She tried to reach for the light. But every time she found a sliver of calm, another jolt of pain smashed it apart. Days bled into weeks, weeks into something else. Time no longer meant anything. Her connection to the Force was twisted. Her emotions cracked, shattered. Komari Vosa began to scream, but the Bando Gora only laughed. They wanted breaking. They wanted madness. They wanted the vessel. And they sensed something in her that they sensed in no other captive. They sensed a deep, dark potential. They sensed her fire, her rage, her instinct buried beneath Jedi discipline. Where others broke and remained broken, Komari Vosa broke and began knitting herself back together with the dark side. Komari Vosa did not lose her mind. She sharpened it into something worse. After one of the longest periods of deprivation, they dragged Vosa into a convergence chamber lit by crimson torches. At its center sat a bowl of liquid, a toxic blend of death stick derivatives and neurotoxins. They forced her to inhale, but something inside of her snapped. Her senses exploded. Her vision split into colors and of shadow. She felt the Force not as serenity, but as a deep hunger. For the first time, the rage that she had kept buried under Dooku's discipline roared free. She looked at her captors, their twisted faces, their cruelty, and something primal surged through her. She moved. Even restrained, she tore her arm free with a wet crack of broken bone. She lunged forward, biting into a cultist's throat with animalistic ferocity. She seized another by the face, smashing his head against the stone with a wet, hollow sound. The other scrambled back in shock, but shock quickly turned to awe. Komari Vosa pulled a cultist blade from her own leg and turned it on the rest, and with no hesitation, no mercy, and no restraint, she slaughtered every zealot in the chamber. The screams echoed down the corridors. The Bando Gora did not rush to stop her. They watched. They waited. When she staggered out of the chamber, blood-soaked, trembling, half delirious, the survivors did not attack. They bowed. The woman who had once been a Jedi Padawan had become something else entirely, a creature of pain fueled by rage, empowered by a raw, unfiltered connection to the dark side, capable of tearing her tormentors apart with nothing but will and fury. The Bando Gora saw a leader, a High Priestess, a vessel of the Force that they worshipped, a mind broken open wide to let the darkness pour through freely. Komari Vosa would not reclaim her sanity. She replaced it. She embraced the frenzy that broke the others. She learned to ride the chemical high, to bend the cult's twisted narcotics into tools of domination rather than submission. She mastered their rituals. She learned their signals, their chants, their poisons. And in time, she didn't simply lead the cult, she remade it. She turned them into a cult that could infiltrate criminal syndicates, seduce senators, and poison entire populations through weaponized death sticks. By the time she fully ascended as High Priestess, she was no longer a fallen Jedi. She was an architect of true terror, a dark side sovereign, a threat moving beneath the galaxy's surface. Powerful enough even that Darth Sidious took notice. The Bando Gora believed that Komari Vosa was chosen by their gods, chosen by the darkness, chosen by the Force. Once Vosa took control, the Bando Gora evolved from a chaotic death cult into something more dangerous. She resurrected them and imposed a hierarchy, using the discipline from Dooku, something that no previous leader had ever done. Her first innovation was her most terrifying: to weaponize death sticks. Vosa's chemical specialists, former spice lords, underworld chemists, and enslaved scientists would refine the narcotic into a liquid neurotoxin. A single dose didn't just intoxicate, it shredded individuality, and it left them open to suggestion. In time, a user became an assassin, a carrier, a spy, a sleeper agent, and a living weapon. Death sticks became her method of growing an army of unwilling servants, addicts bound to her through the Force itself, helpless against her influence. She used them everywhere: on smugglers, on impoverished workers, on politicians' aides, on Black Sun foot soldiers, on corrupt customs officers. Anyone who touched her supply chains was absorbed into her network. Her criminal empire expanded. Vosa made alliances the Jedi never saw coming: Gardula the Hutt on Tatooine, Sibolto on Malastare, Groff Hogg on Coruscant, all of them helping her seed her product into the underworld. Even Senator Connis Trell, a sitting member of the Republic Senate, fell under her influence. This was no longer a cult. It was a growing empire, one woven through narcotics, fanaticism, fear, and whispered indoctrination. Her assassins struck at rival syndicates, eliminating anyone who challenged her supply lines. Her spies infiltrated multiple criminal organizations, destabilizing them from within. Her corrupt enforcers even infiltrated law enforcement and local planetary governments. No one knew her name, but everyone felt her influence. This was the Sith rule of two, but a mockery. What made Vosa uniquely dangerous was simple. She wasn't building a drug ring, she was accidentally building a shadow version of the rule of two. A secret, centralized power structure built around one master, a legion of agents, political influence, a covert army, a loyal brainwashed network that worshipped her alone. This was a mockery of the foundation that Sidious spent decades cultivating. Only she was building her own version, and it was not of Sith. That made her unpredictable, impossible to control, and potentially catastrophic. At first, Palpatine monitored her out of curiosity. Another fallen Jedi, another broken weapon, another potential piece on the holotable of galactic domination. But then she reached the Senate. A cult leader, mad, brilliant, unstable, had corrupted a sitting Republic senator and was beginning now to influence votes, supply chains, and trade routes. This was no longer a curiosity. This was a threat. Sidious did not fear many people, but he did fear disruption, things outside of his plan, things beyond his orchestration, things growing in the dark. And Komari Vosa, High Priestess of the Bando Gora, was becoming precisely that. Sidious watched her work and made a quiet, private decision. Komari Vosa must die. But if she is to be destroyed, it must serve a purpose beyond a simple cleanup. So Sidious turned to his apprentice, Darth Tyrannus, the very man whose failure had created Vosa in the first place, and he gave him a task. Find someone capable of killing Komari Vosa, a warrior who could defeat a fallen Jedi, a template strong enough to serve the Sith plan. A hunter. Tyrannus knew exactly who that meant. Jango Fett. Why Jango? Komari Vosa's legend was tied directly to the Mandalorians. She had slaughtered 20 true Mandalorians on Galidraan with ruthless efficiency. She had carved her name into their culture through blood and humiliation. The best warriors in the galaxy had fallen before her. So Tyrannus needed someone who could defeat a Jedi, reverse the shame of Galidraan, prove himself superior to the very monster Sidious had targeted, and demonstrate that he could outwit and outfight Force wielders, a crucial trait if the clones were to execute Order 66 successfully. Jango Fett had unmatched skill. He was a Mandalorian. He had hunted Force sensitives. He had tactical brilliance and a history of surviving impossible missions. But what set Jango Fett apart was that he lacked fear. Not arrogance, not pride, actual fearlessness, the kind earned through years of surviving genocide, slavery, betrayal, and war. If Jango Fett could kill Komari Vosa, a deranged, drug-fueled, dark-side-infused warrior, then he could kill any Jedi. And that was the prize that Sidious wanted. An army built from someone who could kill Jedi. The bounty was set. Darth Tyrannus placed a bounty of 5 million credits on Vosa's head, an absurd sum for any target not named Jedi. The price was deliberately chosen. It ensured the galaxy's top hunters would take the bait, and it masked Dooku's involvement. The hunt for Komari Vosa became a shadow war fought across multiple worlds. On Tatooine, on Malastare, on Coruscant, on Bogdan. Every step brought Jango Fett closer to Vosa. Many hunters finally located Komari Vosa to the path of Kolma. The cultists emerged from the shadows of the world like insects overwhelming even elite killers. But Jango Fett survived it all. He pushed through every ambush. He solved every clue. He outmaneuvered every trap. He killed other rivals. He broke through the final defenses, and he forced his way into the Citadel itself, a labyrinth of stone corridors echoing with drug-fueled chanting. And at the heart of it, Komari Vosa waited, in her throne room, her eyes sunken, her hair bone white, her presence radiating cold, 2 curved hilt lightsabers burning red in her hands, a mockery of the elegance she had learned from Dooku, a reflection of the madness of the Bando Gora, a weapon shaped from the Jedi. She had felt Jango long before he entered the chamber. The Force did not whisper his name, it hissed it in her ear, and she welcomed him with a smile. The first true challenge she had faced since Galidraan, the test that Sidious needed. The hunter and the fallen Padawan faced each other in the dim light of Kolma's throne room. Everything that Komari Vosa had become, every wound, every rage, every ounce of twisted strength was about to be unleashed. The throne room door slammed shut behind Jango, sealing him inside the cult's citadel. Vosa stood at the center of the chamber waiting. No speech, no theatrics, just the cold, trembling anticipation of a predator that had finally sensed prey worthy of its teeth. Her twin red lightsabers ignited with a sharp hiss, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. The room fell silent. Jango didn't waste his breath either. He raised his Westar and fired. Vosa didn't deflect the first bolt. She moved before the trigger even depressed, a blur of pale hair and curved metal. The blaster bolt slicing through the space where her head had once been less than a heartbeat earlier. Then she was on him, Her saber slashed in tight, precise arcs, not wild, not frenzied, but terrifyingly measured. Every strike was a lesson from Dooku twisted into a weapon. Jango's jetpack flared, blasting him backwards as her blades carved 2 molten lines through the floor where he had once stood. He fired again, rapid bursts, staggered timing, trying to catch her off rhythm. But Vosa did not move like a Jedi anymore. She moved like something unhinged and brilliant, ducking, weaving, contorting her body around shots with an unnatural elasticity that came from behind chemical conditioning layered over newfound dark side instinct. She closed the distance with an acrobatic vault, landing a boot squarely against Jango's chest plate. The Mandalorian slammed backward into a stone pillar. Air punched out of him. The priestess landed lightly, tilted her head just slightly, watching him crawl to a knee. "You're strong," she whispered, voice trembling with excitement. "Stronger than the others, stronger than the Mandalorians on Galidraan." Her smile widened. "But you're still nothing." She lunged. Jango's gauntlet darted up, whipcord firing with a snap that wrapped around Vosa's wrist, yanking her off balance. Her saber crashed against stone with a flash of sparks. Jango launched forward, jet-assisted tackle, slamming her into the opposite wall hard enough to crack stone. Vosa hissed in pain, but her eyes burned brighter, as if the impact had thrilled her. Jango fired a wrist rocket point blank, but Vosa's free hand lashed out, force push detonating the rocket prematurely, sending both fighters hurling apart in opposite directions. She somersaulted through the burst of fire and smoke, landing in a crouch, robe smoldering, eyes locked on his. "You fight like you believe you can win." She came at him again. Her sabers flickered in a deadly pattern, Jarkai with the precision of Makashi overlaid on top. She carved through his cover of blaster fire, deflecting one bolt into Jango's own jetpack, sending sparks scattering. He switched tactics immediately. Flamethrower. A pillar of fire roared across the chamber, igniting the ceremonial banners and sending Vosa spinning backward. Cloak of flame. She rolled, extinguished the flames with a burst of force energy, her teeth bared in a snarl. The next moment she blurred forward, blades whipping for his helmet. Jango ducked, barely, and drove a knee into her abdomen, followed by a quick stun pulse from his gauntlet that cracked against her ribs. Vosa staggered. For the first time she faltered. For the first time she realized Jango Fett was not prey. He was the test that had been promised to her entire life. She laughed, a wild, broken sound. But Jango Fett was done playing defense. He triggered his jetpack in a controlled burst, slamming into her with the force of a battering ram. His vibroblade flashed free, carving across her wrist, her right-hand lightsaber clattering to the floor. She screamed, not in fear, but in fury, in humiliation. She lunged at him with her remaining blade, but her movements were now uneven. Her balance had slipped, her senses fraying. Years of chemical distortion, rage, and deprivation were catching up to her, and Jango exploited every opening. He blasted her backward with a sonic charge. He drove her into the throne steps with a gauntlet punch. He forced her onto the defense, step by step, inch by inch. Komari Vosa, the High Priestess, the Butcher of Galidraan, stumbled. Her saber arm trembled, her breath hitched. As she weakened, a shadow moved in the doorway. She felt it instantly. A familiar presence. A cold, calculating void. The only man whose approval she ever wanted. The only man who never gave it. Her voice cracked into a whisper. "Dooku, he is here." Darth Tyrannus stepped into the light. Expression unreadable. The moment struck her heart with more finality than any blaster bolt. The facade fell away. Komari Vosa was not a cult leader. She was not a dark priestess. She was not even a monster. She was a Jedi Padawan looking to her master for the recognition she spent her entire life bleeding for. She reached a hand towards his, not to attack, but to be seen, to be forgiven, to matter. Dooku raised his hand, and with a cold, effortless telekinetic grip, he crushed her throat. Her knees buckled. Her body hit the floor with a thud, and the glow in her eyes faded. For the second time in her life, Dooku abandoned her, without a word, and without remorse, without acknowledging the monster that he had made. Jango Fett stood over the body, chest heaving, armor scorched, visor reflecting the fallen apprentice, and Tyrannus' hands clasped behind his back, spoke not now about Komari Vosa, but of clones, of credits, of an army. Komari Vosa died revealing the truth of what Dooku really was. He did not look at her body. He did not kneel beside her. He did not speak a final word. He didn't even allow a flicker of regret to cross his face. The fallen apprentice who had once adored him lay still at the foot of her own throne, and Dooku's eyes drifted instead towards the curved tilt lightsabers that had rolled from her hands. They were elegant, deadly, modeled after his own. They were the only pieces of her he ever truly valued. With a casual sweep of his hand, Tyrannus summoned the twin lightsabers to his grasp. Their hilts clicked against his palms, and for a moment he simply held them, weighing the craftsmanship, the balance, the unmistakable echo of his own training reflected in their design. In the end, the lightsabers were the only part of her that Dooku carried forward. That was all she was. Her death a footnote, her life a lesson to him. And though he would never admit it, Komari Vosa had taught Dooku more about the nature of the dark side than any Sith holocron or ancient text. Komari Vosa was the first living proof of what Dooku's path would bring. As Dooku walked away, the twin lightsabers hanging at his belt, one thought settled quietly in his mind. He would choose better next time. Someone stronger, sharper, more controlled, more malleable, less sentimental. Someone like the gladiator he had recently heard of on Ratatak, a vicious survivor by the name of Asajj Ventress. And with that, my friends, is the end of Komari Vosa's tale in Star Wars Legends. So here is my question to you. If Dooku had actually guided her instead of hiding from her, could Komari Vosa have been saved? Or was her fall inevitable from the start? How much of this is to blame on Dooku? And how much is it to blame on Komari herself? If you enjoyed this deep dive into a more obscure Star Wars Legends character, consider subscribing for more Legends lore. And as always, may the Force be with you.